All right, for the last lesson on Chapter 8, so this is Lesson 4 of our unit that we're working on here for Chapters 8 and 10. We're looking at solving equations not only by hand, but mainly with your graphing display calculator, because most of these we already know you can do by hand, but what we want to see is certain cases where you really can't do them by hand and you need the use of some technology to get you through. So taking a look at the first one, something that's very doable by hand. If we wanted to solve for x, I could start by multiplying x over to the left side, and if I did that, this is the look that I would get. So x squared minus 2x equals 1. Right, and we're looking basically just solving a quadratic at this point. So if I were to set it equal to 0, so I'm going to bring my 1 over. Right, and we have our traditional methods for solving stuff like this. We try factoring if it's factorable. This one's not. But we also have completing the square. We have quadratic formula. Those are other methods that we have for solving this guy. So just to do one really quick, we'll do a quick completing the square process. So if I were to put my 1 over to the other side, now that I'm going to go through my completing the square process, to complete the square, if I do b over 2 squared, so negative 2 divided by 2 squared, would tell me that I need to add 1 to both sides of the equation to solve it. The left side I can now put in factored form because it's a perfect square. I can square root both sides. And then if I add my 1 over to the right, we're going to come away with 1 plus or minus square root of 2. And there's always benefit to being able to solve these by hand. The main reason would be you'll never get your calculator to give you an answer in radical form like this. And so if you needed an answer in radical form, you'd have to do it by hand. And so it's important that you know how to use those methods. But if we're open to decimal answers, then we can take advantage of a calculator for that. So one thing that we know how to do is to solve quadratics within our calculator. We've done that earlier on in the year, so I'm not going to go through that in the calculator, but the process was to graph this and then find the x-intercepts of the graph to get my two solutions for that. So you graph it, you go under Calc, and you choose 0, and you just follow the prompts to get your zeros or your intercepts of the graph. And that gives you your two solutions. But what if you don't want to do it at the quadratic stage? What if you want to do it from the initial stage before it's a quadratic? Is there a way to do that? So really simple. We're going to graph the left side of the equation as one graph. So I have x minus 2 as one graph. And I'm going to graph the right side, 1 over x, as a separate graph. And I simply want to know where they are equal to each other or where they intersect. Same thing. So I'm going to hit graph on that. So here comes the x minus 2. Here comes the 1 over x. And you can see that there are 2 points of intersection. Just as we had two solutions when we did that by hand, there's going to be two solutions when you do it on the calculator. So I just need to identify those 2 points of intersection. So if I go under Calc and choose intersect, we'll just start with the first one where my cursor is closest to. So enter, enter, enter. And there we go. 2.41 is my first point of intersection. In your calculator, if you did 1 plus the square root of 2, you're going to get 2.41. And so that's our first answer. Whether you did it through this path or through this path, I'm going to get that 2.41 as an answer. Do keep in mind that the y coordinate is not part of your answer. You are only solving for x. Y is not involved. And so if you listed that as an ordered pair, you would be marked down for that. And so you only list the x coordinate as your solution. If you want the other solution, because remember I also have 1 minus the square root of 2 as an answer. And so I need that answer also. If I go under Calc and again choose intersect, now I'm just going to move my cursor over close as I can to the other point of intersection and just hit enter, enter, enter. There you go. You got negative 0.414 as your other point of intersection. So if you did 1 minus the square root of 2, you should also get negative 0.414. And so we can get our answer either by hand or by calculator this way. And so this method of solving by graphing is a great way to go. If you were to look at the one that we're going to do here, for example, 2, you would need a calculator for this. We could try to use logarithms, but that would be a somewhat complicated process because you not only have x as an exponent, but you also have it over here on the other side where it's not an exponent, and so that gets really tricky to solve for. So again, we can just use our graphing tools to help us out with this. So again, I'm going to do 5x as one graph. I'm going to do 3 to the x power as a separate graph, and I simply want to know where those two equations are equal to each other. So we got our 5x right there. We're going to get 3 to the x power right there, and so here's one thing you really got to be careful on. How many solutions do we have? Obviously, there's one solution right there where they intersect, but do they intersect again somewhere else? So sometimes you have to zoom out in order to see all of your solutions. So you always want to make sure, so I'm going to go zoom out, and I'm going to put my cursor right about here and hit enter. You always want to make sure that you have found all of your solutions. Sometimes if your graphing window is too small, then you may not see all of your solutions. And so I am looking kind of in this neighborhood right here. Let me just adjust my window. I'm going to go from 0 to 20. And see if I can't close in on those solutions a little bit. So there's my two solutions right in there. So make sure that you always have accounted for all of your solutions. But again, if I go under Calc and choose Intersect, get my cursor closest to either one that I want to find first, and go enter, enter, enter. So there we go. 2.17 is my first solution. And if I go under Calc and choose Intersect one more time, let's get my cursor over to the other guy and hit enter, enter, enter. And 0.269 would be my other solution. So just make sure you get them all accounted for. Oftentimes, equations like this will come with a domain. There may be a whole lot of solutions, and so sometimes they'll come with a domain to restrict where you're going to look for your solutions, and so that's something we'll look for as well. For the last one, I just threw in a really complicated equation just to show that there are going to be cases where you really need a calculator to solve in cases like this, and so I tried to throw one in that would be really nearly impossible to solve by hand. So that's why this one is here, just to show you we can do even the more complicated scenarios with a graphing calculator. So again, I'm going to throw those in here real quick. So I'm going to graph the left side as one equation, so 2 raised to the 0.5x power. Whoa. 2 raised to the 0.5x power. And for the other one, we're going to put in our 2 plus sine pi x. To solve our second equation. And again, we're just going to graph those and find out where these two guys intersect each other. Something to consider whenever you're dealing with trig functions like this, you do need to make sure whether your calculator should be in degrees or radians. In this case, I do see there is pi involved, which means my calculator should be in radians. And right now I can see it's in degrees. So I'm going to hit mode and go down to radians and hit enter and quit and graph. But now I'm going to get a more accurate solution here that my calculator is in the right mode. So there we go right there. I'm going to change my window here a little bit so we can see more of what's going on. So let me go farther to the left. So my x minimum, let's do negative 20. And I'm going to shorten this guy a little bit. And as far as the y values go, let me shorten those a little bit as well so we can see a little more of what's going on here with the graph. So let's see how much that helps. So there is the 2 to the 0.5x power. Here comes our trig function, and we can see I have a few points of intersection right in here. And so this might be a good time to zoom in on that area of the graph now that I can see where my solutions are. So let's zoom in. I'm going to put my cursor right into that neighborhood and hit enter so I can zoom in on that portion of the graph. So sometimes you got to toy with your window settings a little bit here in order to get them. So 1, 2, 3 points of intersection. So I'm going to get 3 solutions. And I'm not going to go through all 3. You know how to do it. Again, go into Calc and choose intersect. And then you would find your 3 solutions by doing that method.